Hello everyone, and welcome to English Grammar with Max, or Engramax. Today we want to talk about modal verbs. So, modal verbs, these are some more common examples of modal verbs: can, may, might, could, will, would, shall, should, ought to, must, and sometimes need is also considered a modal verb. But these are the most common ones and the most well-known ones. So, first, some things about modal verbs, or some facts we need to know about modal verbs. First, modal verbs are auxiliary verbs. What does that mean? It means they always need a main verb. Look at this sentence in here. She can speak French. This is your modal verb and this is your main verb. So, in whatever sentence you have a modal verb, it means you need a main verb to complete your sentence. Another point about modal verbs is that modal verbs are never used together. You cannot use two modal verbs together in one sentence. For example, this sentence cannot be correct. I will can help you. This is incorrect because we cannot use two modal verbs in one sentence together. The next point is modal verbs are always followed by a base form. It means your main verb, if your auxiliary verb is a modal verb, your main verb always needs to be in base form. For example, they may, this is your modal verb, stay with us. This is your main verb. It cannot be stayed or staying or any other form. It always needs to be in the base form, with no exception. He would like it. Again, would is your auxiliary verb or your modal verb, and like is your main verb, which must be in base form. Modal verbs only have one form. Actually, this is the difference between modal verbs and regular verbs, like normal verbs, like eat, watch, see, sit. These normal verbs, we can conjugate them. We can say, for example, I see, you see, she sees, or he sees. But that doesn't hold true with modal verbs. You say I can, you can, she can, and so on. And the thing is, sometimes some think that could is the past form of can. That is not true. Can and could are two independent modal verbs. We use them for different purposes. One of the purposes of could is to describe ability in the past. And because we use can to describe ability in the present, we may get this impression that could is the past form of can, but actually that is not true. Okay, the thing about modal verbs is that actually, why do we need modal verbs? And why do we have modal verbs in English? Modal verbs are used to describe functions in English. What are functions? For example, request is a function. Ability is another function. When you say, I can speak in English or English, you are describing your ability of speaking in English. That is the meaning of function. Or probability, obligation, deduction, permission, suggestion, and we have a lot of other functions as well. Today we are going to go through some of these functions one by one and see how we can modal verbs to describe them. Modal verbs are used to describe functions. Some are used for a variety of functions. It means that we may use one modal verbs to describe, for example, two different functions. It depends on the situation and also on the context. It means how we use that modal verb. Okay, the first function we want to discuss is ability. And remember, today we are talking about the present tense of these functions. Next session, next week, we're going to talk about past tenses in these functions. So we use can to describe ability in the present time. For example, can she send the letters? It means, does she have the ability to send the letters? And remember, we can also use be able to describe ability. And of course, be able to is not a modal verb, but sometimes, especially when we cannot use can, we use be able to. For example, I've told you that we cannot use two modal verbs together. So when we are describing an ability in the future, we may want to use will, and we cannot use will with can. So we say, I won't be able to join you. So be able is also used to describe ability, especially it is very useful when you cannot use can, when you cannot use two modal verbs together. Okay, the next function we're going to talk about is asking for permission or giving permission. And remember, again, can is for present time today. Example, you can't park here. It means you don't have the permission to park here. Another example in the form of a question, can I use your pen? This is actually asking for somebody's permission to use their pen. So another function is deduction. Deduction means that when you make a conclusion based on evidence and some facts you believe in. For example, look at that cake. It must be her birthday. For a fact, you know that people buy cakes or big cakes when it is their birthday or somebody's birthday, and you can see a cake. So based on the evidence that you can see and based on the fact that you believe in, you deduce that it must be her birthday. We have positive deductions and negative deductions. For example, sometimes you say something is the case. You are sure based on the evidence, you are sure something is the case. We use must. For example, we say, the lights are on, they must be home. But sometimes we want to say something is not the case or could not be the case. For example, we say, he can't be dead. I saw him an hour ago. It means it's impossible for him to be dead because I saw him an hour ago. We call it negative deduction. In negative deduction, remember, we cannot use must not or mustn't. For deduction, we only use the positive form of must because we only use it for positive deduction. If we want to make a negative deduction, we use can't or couldn't. And in this case, only in this case, can't and couldn't mean completely, almost completely the same. For example, you're saying that I saw him an hour ago. He can't be dead. In here, you could replace can't with couldn't, and it still will have the same meaning. Next function is expectation. When you expect something to happen, we use should to describe expectation. For example, they should arrive any minute. It means we expect them to arrive any minute. Another function is probability. We use may, might, and could for a probability. But remember, we use may and may not, could and could not, but only could. We cannot use couldn't to express probability. Let me give you an example. She may be the teacher. It means it is probable that she's the teacher. We could use might and could instead of may because this is a positive sentence. This is a positive sentence and this is a negative one. So when it is a positive sentence for probability, there is almost no difference between may, might, and could. But when you add not to these modal verbs, you only can use may and might, and not could. I'll explain why. He may not be able to drive. Instead of may, we could use might. We could say he might not be able to drive. Why can't we use couldn't? Because if you remember from the other function of, for example, possibility, when you use couldn't, it means it is impossible to happen. It is not probable anymore. When you say he couldn't be able to drive, it means it's impossible for him to drive. It is not a probability anymore. Another function is obligation. We use must and have to describe obligation. But remember, only must is a modal verb. Have to is not a modal verb. It's a normal verb. But why do we use must and have to? Why do we learn them together? Because there is a reason. We say, I must finish this today. It means I am obligated to finish this today because we use must to express obligation. We could also say, I have to stay late at work, or I have to finish this today. Look, must and have to in positive form almost mean the same. There is little difference between must and have to, but there is a little difference between them. We say, when you say, I must finish this today, when you use must to express obligation, it means it is your decision. But when you use have to describe obligation, it means it is someone else's decision. I have to stay late at work, it means it's someone else's decision. It means, for example, my boss has asked me to stay late at work. Okay, next function is mustn't, the negative form of must. We use it for prohibition. It means when something is forbidden or prohibited, we use mustn't. When we say you mustn't smoke here, it means it is illegal to smoke here. But I said that must and have to in their positive forms are almost, they mean almost the same. But when you make them negative, they mean completely different. Mustn't is used for prohibition, but don't have to is used for describing lack of obligation, or when there is no obligation. We say you don't have to pay, it's free. It means it's up to you if you want to pay or not, or it's optional, for example. Okay, the last function we want to talk about is advice. When you want to give someone some advice, we use should or shouldn't. For example, you should talk to your brother. But there are some points about this function advice we need to talk about. We have also other ways to express or to describe this function. We could use ought to. Ought to is another modal verb we use to describe advice, and it is a bit more formal. And this is a negative form of a sentence with ought to. You ought not to speak. It means you shouldn't speak. So the negative form of ought to is ought not to. We have another way to describe advice. Sometimes we use I think or I don't think, especially when you want to express your opinion as a piece of advice to somebody. We don't say, I think you shouldn't do that. We generally don't do that. So if we expect someone not to do something, we start the sentence with, I don't think you should do that. We don't say, I think you shouldn't do that. That is not common at all. If you want to use I think, and if you want to, for example, ask someone not to do something, you need to start the sentence with, I don't think you should do that. We also have another way to express advice. We use had better plus base form. I know this is not a modal verb, but this is another way to express advice. We say he'd better, we generally use the contracted form of it. This is had. He'd better, then the base form of the main verb. He'd better arrive soon. It means we're giving someone a piece of advice, or we think it's a good thing to happen. Okay, let's start with some exercises about modal verbs in present time. Okay, let's start with the first exercise. Underline the correct word or phrase in each sentence. A. Look at those clouds. I think it might rain. We are here expressing a probability, so we use might. B. This is impossible. Again, this is a negative deduction, so we use can't. It can't be the answer, because may not is probability and mustn't be is prohibition, so the only option we have is can't. C. Well done. You must be very pleased. This is a form of deduction. We are seeing some evidence of some person being happy, and then we make a deduction based on that. A positive deduction, we use must. D. I have no idea where Jane is. She could be anywhere. We use could in the present to express probability. It is the same as may and might. E. I suppose it's possible I might come to your party. When you say it's possible, you're expressing probability. We use may, might, or could in positive sentences. F. I'm not sure. I may not be able to get there in time. Again, expressing probability using may. G. That can't be David. He hasn't got a bike. Again, this is a negative deduction. We use can't. H. Lisa isn't here yet. She must be on her way. We are making a deduction in here based on the evidence and some facts we know. We are guessing, it's a strong guess about where Lisa could be. I. There is someone at the door. It could be the postman. Again, we are guessing, we are expressing probability in here. J. Sorry, I can't come
out tonight. I have to do my homework. In here we are expressing ability. It means we are not able to come out tonight. Next exercise. Rewrite each sentence so that it has a similar meaning and contains the word in bold. A. It would be a good idea for you to see a dentist. We use ought. In here we are making a suggestion, so we could use should or ought to. You ought to see a dentist. B. It's not necessary for us to go to school tomorrow. In here we are expressing a lack of obligation or something which is up to your own choice. We don't have to go to school tomorrow. We use don't have to for this purpose. C. I'm sure that isn't John because he is in Paris. Again, this is a deduction and it is definitely a negative deduction, so we need to use can't. He can't be John. He's in Paris. D. Perhaps Anne is at home. This is a probability we are trying to express. So we say Anne may be at home. We could use Anne might be at home or could be at home are also possible correct answers. E. You ought to wear a warm coat today. Again, in here we are making a suggestion. Another way of making a suggestion is using had better plus the base form of the main verb. So we say, you'd better wear a warm coat today. F. It's possible that I'll be late. Again, we are expressing probability and we have to use may. I may be late. Again, you could use might or could given the opportunity, but in here we have to use may. G. I wouldn't go skiing if I were you. Again, this is a way of making a suggestion, and we could use think to make a suggestion. This is, we are saying someone shouldn't do something, so we start the sentence with I don't think you should go skiing. We cannot say I think you shouldn't go skiing. H. It is forbidden to leave your bike here. In here we are talking about prohibition, and we use can't to express prohibition. You can't leave your bike here. And the last exercise, rewrite each sentence so that it does not contain the phrase in bold. Again, you can rewrite the sentences in any way you like, but definitely without the phrase in bold. It means you can add or remove anything else to the remaining of the sentence, but not the phrase in bold. A. If I were you, I'd take more exercise. Again, in here we are making a suggestion using the second conditional. So we use I think you should take exercise. So this is one way of expressing suggestion. B. I expect the plane will land soon. For the function of expectation, we can use should. The plane should land soon. C. You are not allowed to use a dictionary. This is the function of prohibition, and we use can't to express prohibition. You can't use a dictionary. Or you could say you mustn't use a dictionary. That is also a correct answer, because mustn't is also used to express prohibition. D. It's impossible for that to be Sue. She's abroad. Again, we are making a deduction, and a negative deduction. It can't be Sue. She's abroad. E. It's possible that I'll come to your party. In here we are trying to express the function of probability, so we could use may, might, or could. I may come to your party, or I might come to your party, or I could come to your party are all correct. F. It's against the law to drop litter in the street. Again, it's the function of prohibition. So we say you can't drop litter in the street, or you mustn't drop litter in the street. G. It's not necessary for you to wait. A lack of obligation. You don't have to wait. H. You'd better stay in bed today. This is a form of making a suggestion. So we could say you should stay in bed today, or you ought to stay in bed today.
Thank you guys for watching another episode of Ingramax. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the comment section, whether you are on YouTube or Instagram. See you next week.